Hey everyone, welcome to a long overdue episode of Public History with Jake and Justin. I'm Jake Wynn, and I'm joined by my co host, Justin Voigthofer. It's been a very long time since we last jumped on to record an episode, but we are thrilled to be back with you for more interviews, discussions, conversations, and more on the podcast. Today, we're going to be joined by Mark Frederick, a filmmaker from Pennsylvania whose recent documentary, Blair County, A People's History, premiered earlier this year in 2024. But before we get into our interview with Mark, since it's been such a long time, Justin, how have you been?
Well, see, this was strategic, Jake, because what we did is we didn't tell anybody that quote unquote season one ended like every good TV show, and we left them wanting for more. So this is the official opening of season two. How I'm gonna excuse the absence. But we talked. Fall gets in the way of things. I'm sure everybody else can kind of uh, relate to before you know it, weekends get boggled up and 2, 3 weeks go by. But in the middle of our recordings, Jake, I do want to highlight we ran. We ran a lot. Jake and I ran a half marathon in central Pennsylvania called End of the Road Marathon, which, Jake, you can probably talk about the history better than I can. The old PA Turnpike. So we spent, what, 6 miles underground running through some tunnels?
Yep, there was this is one of probably, I don't know if it's the only running race that requires you to have a headlamp, but you had to have a headlamp because you're going through 5 or 6 miles of tunnel along this abandoned section of the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and it is a wild experience that I will say is like, I don't know how you felt, Justin, but like for me it was like mentally taxing of like you are running in a tunnel and it doesn't feel like you're moving forward and there's no light at the end of the tunnel, and even when you
Right.
do see light at the end of the tunnel it doesn't feel like it's getting any closer.
Yeah, and that's what's funny is that the adage the light at the end of the tunnel does apply here, but right, it's the tunnels were so long that it just didn't move. It just kept staying there, and you're like, I feel like I should be seeing the end of this there, but you just saw a little speck in the distance, and you also saw headlamps bobbing up and down as you were running too. So that was the only barometer for knowing how close you were to somebody was seeing like somebody's headlamp bob up and down. Was a great experience. Was really fun. Tied in a pretty cool little historical stretch of road with a cool half marathon. So yeah, ton of fun. Highly recommend. But let's get to some history, Jake.
Absolutely. Well, before we get into the show fully, just a reminder, if you've been enjoying the show, even though we haven't been around for a long time, please be sure to rate and review the podcast. Lets other folks find the show and know that it is worth their while listening to. So be sure to rate and review. And now for our interview with Mark Frederick. Our guest today is Mark Frederick, a filmmaker who released a new documentary about his home region of Pennsylvania. Blair County, A People's History, is a documentary that tells the story of a central Pennsylvania community shaped by industry and innovation. It's a great way to show how one community shaped and was shaped by our nation's history. The film debuted in April 2024. Frederick has produced award winning short films, mostly about historical topics, including two shorts about the Japanese American experience in World War II. He is a graduate of Penn State Altoona and has worked at numerous historical sites in the Altoona area, including where I met him at the Railroaders Memorial Museum. He has created films for multiple historic sites, is currently working as a museum consultant, and operates his own multimedia business, Brush Mountain Media. Mark Frederick, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Good. I'm really happy to be here to talk with you guys about the movie.
Excellent. Well, we are excited to chat about it with you. I have to say, since seeing the trailer for it, which I saw you posted and your brother posted, Jared posted about on social media back earlier in 2024, I was like, oh man, I got to see this film. I got to see this film. And in watching it, I mean, it was a great documentary that for someone with just kind of a loose knowledge of the history of Blair County, especially of Altoona, it was very, very insightful. And I think you did a really, really great job of summing up centuries of history into a pretty short time frame. I'm really curious, what was your inspiration for making this film?
Sure. Well, I worked with closely with the Blair County Historical Society. They actually reached out to me around the time that I started my position at the Railroaders Memorial Museum in Altoona. And at the time, in 2020, I was like, I'm new to this position. COVID was happening. I'm gonna say no for now. And they didn't necessarily have too much of a budget, and I was a little concerned about that. So over time, kind of working with them, they kind of did bring me on at some point. They did ask me a few times, and finally I said, "Heck with it, sure, let's do it." So it was really my executive producer, Julia Shocker. It was kind of her brainchild. She had previously written a book just about Altoona, and she came to me and I said, "Okay, what is your vision for this?" And she initially wanted to do a 10-part series, very kind of similar to a Ken Burns documentary. And I thought, wow, that's a lot to chew off. As a freelancer, kind of going solo, I thought I'm not gonna have time to do that, especially with a full time job. So I did kind of talk her down a bit to make something shorter and tighter when it came to a narrative and what was discussed. There were even fun things like talking about every single mayor and you know just a lot of things that didn't necessarily need to be covered. But we did finally agree on a name and a focus. I gave them a list of interviewees that we thought would do a good job of telling stories, and so it kind of all just came from that. It finally, I think, in April of 23, I was finally in charge of the entire project.
Awesome. I'm curious, if you could sum up this film in kind of in short, as you went through this inspiration, kind of what would you say is like the thesis of the film, or what do you feel like in this shorter, not 10-part series format, would you say is kind of the main focus, the main thrust of what you're trying to say with this film about Blair County?
I would say that it is ultimately the story of people. I know that for some living historians and museum professionals, that's sometimes hard to do. I used to be a World War II reenactor, and I always despised guys laying out artifacts on a blanket and not really interpreting. And so I approach filmmaking very much in the same way, where we focus on the people, because that's what I think the public is interested in. It's something relatable. They're not always going to be interested in some sort of item or some sort of building. And so we really wanted to focus on that human interest story, but also make sure that we cover that broader appeal and focus on all of those individual stories throughout an entire county over centuries. So it was certainly an undertaking.
Yeah, and I was kind of struck by that, Mark, because I going into it when I thought, oh, it's about Blair County, there'll be maybe one or two people that kind of talk. I was blown away by I don't know how many people you might have the number of individuals you interviewed, but it was,
13
yeah, I
interviews.
was going to say it's probably over 10. Um, how was that hard to get the buy-in, or were people willing to just kind of come up and talk about their aspect of it?
It really was not difficult to coordinate all of that. I did have a few people that ended up being replaced from that list, but it ended up working out quite fine. Most of them, like my brother Jared and I, already knew just from our work in the history field. So it really wasn't hard to convince these individuals to come and sit down and talk about things that they love to talk about.
Well, yeah,
So
and I guess that was going to be my next question would be how did you have to kind of puzzle them in, or did you let them kind of just open mic, hey, what do you want to talk about? How did you kind of coordinate getting them to follow the story that you're trying to tell?
sure. Well, Jared, my brother and scriptwriter, uh, kind of came up with this very creative narrative where um, we kind of wanted to connect all of these links, so to speak, between each of the towns covered in the documentary. And so, what he did actually was is that he looked at a map of Blair County from 1859 and said, "Okay, what do I want to cover? Are there any interesting or fun stories that I already know about that we want to feature?" And all of these stories eventually built a narrative, and they were all linked together. It was really important for us that it be thematic, because we thought if it was like chronological or some other order, it might be disjointed. It might repeat itself. More importantly, because obviously, like every town in Blair County has something to do with the Pennsylvania Railroad. So we didn't want to repeat ourselves every time that we introduced the audience to a new town or village or whatever it may be. So that's why we kind of went with the thematic uh, organizing of the film. So we finally got these interviewees, and we already kind of knew what we wanted them to say. So we essentially gave them really good questions that we knew would get the response that we needed. So then we had nice sound bites that would eventually form our overall narrative.
Yeah, you did a really great job with the interviews. It came across that that these everyone knows exactly what they're talking about. They know their stories really well. And having been on the I'd say the business end of some not so great not so well orchestrated interview questions. I hope you won't feel the same after this podcast. Um, it can be quite painful to go through kind of like being coached to say exactly what the producer is looking for to say, and not almost not being trusted to say. So did you feel like everybody, because you built those relationships, did you feel like you had the buy-in that everybody kind of knew that they were in kind of a safe space to share their story?
It certainly helped knowing a majority of the interviewees already. I think they are already kind of comfortable with you, and they're familiar with how you talk and ask questions. And many of them are just super knowledgeable about their certain topic that they cover in the movie. Yeah, sometimes you had to coach them a little, but as colleagues and friends, they were quite welcoming of that because to them, you're making them look good. You're improving the overall interview. So I think they were very appreciative of any guidance that I had.
Yeah. So want to dive in a little bit here to the film itself and some of the topics that get covered. Um, One of the key settings for the film is the largest city in Blair County, Altoona, a place which I've had the opportunity to visit a few times and love it. Love its history, the architecture, the stories that are all over the landscape there. What do you view and what is the film's take on the place that the city has in the telling of American history?
Sure. That's a really good question. I think it's such a diverse history here locally. I mean, have everything from natural history, the story of indigenous people, uh, have fantastic Civil War history, especially here in Altoona. But it goes out to World War II and the present. It's just a very, very diverse story. It's not like Gettysburg, where it's primarily focused on the Civil War story. Um, so, just to give you a couple examples of that, there's the Loyal War Governors Conference, where Union governors came to Altoona to meet not only about the American Civil War and raising Union troops, but also to support Abraham Lincoln in his Emancipation Proclamation. Um, so there's just like little kind of vignettes like that that we cover in the film that not every person will have heard of this, but they really are monumental events that occur here, right here in Blair County. Same thing with Operation Pastorius, the Nazi plot to blow up the Horseshoe Curve. And, that was devised by Adolf Hitler himself. So there's some very interesting and fascinating stories that occurred right here in central Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I for one was like shocked because I saw it in the film. I was like, no way, that's amazing. And then I actually had to look it up, and I was like, that's so cool. And I think that going into Horseshoe Bend. So for the audio audience, he has the world famous Horseshoe Curve plaque behind him as he's talking to us on the Zoom right now. And what does like that location mean to you, or what do the locations around um, Blair County mean? Because that's a major world kind of wide event that's happening in rural Pennsylvania, but in central Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it's certainly a prideful identity. I would say a lot of people are very proud to be from Blair County just simply because of iconic things like the Horseshoe Curve or Mallow Cups or whatever SHEETZ. All of these kind of iconic locations and businesses that have come from Central PA. It's definitely kind of baked into the community that's like part of the identity. I'm not sure if it's necessarily world famous, but it's world famous to us. Uh,
As a SHEETZ man myself, I was so happy that I finally had the background on knowing SHEETZ because I'm not gonna lie, I live in a probably 60-40 sheet Wawa area, and I try to trumpet the SHEETZ as much as I can down here, but I have to now that I have the ammo to educate people on the history of SHEETZ. Now I feel like they're gonna finally be won over to the SHEETZ side. Um, that was one theme I thought was pretty cool was that all of the different foods that come from Blair County. Can you speak to that? What happened? What makes it about this county that you have all of these really kind of famous? I knew a majority of the stuff that you had kind of mentioned in the film, mallow cups, sheets, all that. Like, what? I guess if you had to speak about Blair County, why does the food, or at least my sense, I want to go eat there now. Like, I want to go take a food tour of Blair County.
yeah,
Why is food so important to the people?
no, I encourage it. If you come for breakfast, you have to hit up Tom and Joe's restaurant. It's the best place
All
to
right,
get
good.
breakfast here locally. But now when I was discussing the outline with my executive producer Julia, that was a big thing for her because we have a lot of what she called firsts. So you have the creation of essentially the MTO, the made to order at SHEETZ. You have the first candy cup in history at Boyer Candy. You have the Meadows, which really pushed frozen custard. So you have all these kind of like new innovations in the food industry happening right here in Blair County. So it was definitely something that we wanted to cover.
To pivot a little bit back to a little bit of a potentially heavier topic,
Okay.
another piece of the film that really stood out to me that was really really well done, and I know probably a bit difficult to pull together, was how you told the story of the indigenous history of the region. Can you talk a
Sure.
little bit about how you went about telling that story, especially with a lack of visual resources available for a filmmaker, but maybe even just what is available in terms of source material to tell that story.
Yeah. Well, luckily enough, I had a couple options to lean on. First of all, my brother, just fantastic script writer and researcher. But our interviewee for that section, Lindsay Keeter, is a professor here back at Penn State Altoona, and she's very knowledgeable about Native American history here in Central PA. And so that's pretty much how the interviews worked. Is that we would let them kind of almost guide how, it was definitely very freeing for them to say things a certain way. There were several interviews that went on for a really long time, just because everyone was so interested in the topic that they were talking about. So there was a lot to go off there when it came to what we could pull from the interview itself. But when it comes to visual storytelling, I actually did an orientation film for Fort Roberdeau, here in Sing Valley. And so I already had footage that I got permission to use from them. And then, of course, I had to rely heavily on paintings as well. And so I had actually several artists that I had worked with for the Fort Roberdeau film to kind of come back and allow me to use their paintings for free. It was I'm so grateful for them because there's certainly days in the editing room where you go, oh God, like what am I gonna put here? There's no visuals for this. There's not really a large Native American population in Blair County. It's not like I can go find reenactors easily. So the paintings were really a godsend. I worked with fantastic artists such as John Buxton, who just came through for me and sent me high resolution images of their paintings to use for that chapter.
Well, and that it kind of ties in. I thought the part that was really well done was the kind of industry section of the documentary. Not only because you could draw, and I think a lot more visceral photos and locations, but I was impressed by the reenacting that you were able to get for building the horseshoe pit, all that. So, is it those local? Was it all your World War II group that kind of provided as the reenactors, or how did you kind of augment that? And then also with industry, I was struck by how important it was for Blair County. So I guess it's a two-pronged question. Um, I guess what would be Blair's County story without industry, or what is it? You can't tell it. I guess I answered my own question. But number two is how does industry shape the county? But then also, how did you kind of get the people to film those types of scenes?
Sure. Well, um, yes, it was mainly reenacting friends, and just friends, really anybody that I knew that wanted to be in a movie.
That's great.
Um, we, yeah, none of them were paid actors. They all just wanted to help me out, which is just true friendship, in my opinion. We worked up at Allegheny Portage Railroad National Historic Site, which is part in Blair County and then part in another county. But it was a big canal operation. But I paid a $50 filming permit, and we filmed there in February, I believe. But I have some great stories about that shooting day, because it was like cold but comfortable that week. And then the day that we were scheduled to shoot, it dropped to like 6 degrees. And I debated about canceling. And then I thought, when am I going to have all of these people available again? I'm on a timeline. I'm already pushing it. And so I said, get your gloves out and warm up some coffee, because we're doing this. So we filmed, I think, 5 or 6 scenes at Allegheny Portage Railroad. We filmed the building of the Horseshoe Curve there. We filmed the War Governors Conference. We filmed the Jacob Green incident. Uh, any any recreated footage of like Hollidaysburg life that was in their dining hall. So it was all about maximizing location and time. And it was a very long, cold day. uh, but everyone really pulled through, and we had a ton of free food for everyone. So they were they were excited, but definitely tired by the end of the day.
Love that. We'll work for food. We'll
Yep.
work in intense cold for food. This gets to something that I have always had an interest in filmmaking, in documentaries. I love documentaries. I'm very curious to kind of get into a little bit more of like process side here for you as a filmmaker. When you're kind of mapping out this story and how you're going to tell this story, how do you decide what gets kind of a live action treatment versus what stories don't? Like, how do you block that out? Um,
Well,
yeah,
I think it all boils down to spacing. I wanted to make sure that it wasn't too heavy on one end or the other when it came to recreated scenes. I knew that I had some Fort Roberto footage that I could use in the Native American chapter. In the World War II chapter, I actually reused some footage that I filmed for a failed short film initiative that I was trying to do in 2018 and 2019. Um, and so I knew that I had World War II and Fort Roberto covered. And I thought, okay, what other exciting events do we want to try to recreate? And if so, where are we going to film them? That's really what it came down to. Like, what is not so large scale? Uh, because we don't have a CGI budget or anything like that. So, um, yeah, we just had to kind of identify where we were going to film these scenes, if we were going to recreate them. Um, and again, like maximizing the locations really was a big thing. We knew that we could recreate 4 or 5 scenes in one place. So we not only filmed at Allegheny Portage Railroad, but we also filmed at the Railroaders Museum, because the immersive exhibits there are just very helpful. And I was an employee at the time, so I obviously had that freedom and flexibility to, use their bar exhibit and then go over and use their like railroading house exhibit. And so we filmed probably 3 or 4 scenes there. Anything with Rosie the Riveter, we did outside in the rail yard. We filmed at, of course, the iconic Baker Mansion History Museum, and covered Elias Baker and his iron industry. So it was definitely there were definitely like iconic scenes that we wanted to touch on. We knew kind of what the big ones were, and anything smaller than that, uh, if we couldn't get it done, it was cut.
so the other follow up I had to that is when it comes to these live action scenes, I guess it's handy to have folks in the reenacting and living history community for 200 years of wardrobe.
Yeah, well, that was the other great thing at Allegheny Portage Railroad is that they have a very large costume room that their rangers use often, and so they were nice enough to allow us to use their outfits for all of those 5 or 6 scenes that we did. So that was another big thing is that I had entire costume department that cost me $0. So
That's
yeah,
great. That's really funny. And I guess so. While you were making the film, was there anything that surprised you that either came across differently the way you shot it, or as you looked in and started doing the research or wrote the script that kind of jumped out at the page at you?
there were definitely certain recreated scenes that that I had shots planned for a certain part. Um, for example, at the Railroaders Museum, we had a scene of people sitting in a bar and they're drinking and smoking and reading at newspapers and stuff, turning on a radio. And I initially had that planned when discussing uh, ethnic neighborhoods. I thought, okay, like we'll have different types of music, different types of reading material. Like every ethnic neighborhood in Altoona had their own bar. So I thought that kind of depicted that cultural melting pot well, like having everyone kind of come to a bar. And I ended up really not needing many of the shots for that certain topic, and instead reused those when discussing Operation Pastorius. Because one of my interviewees, said something like, "Oh, he was reading German newspapers and he was listening to German radio," and so I pulled the newspaper shot and the turning on the radio shot from my ethnic neighborhood concept and moved it over to Operation Pastorius. So it's always good to have too much B-roll.
Yeah.
So
That's a good rule of thumb.
yeah, it's
And that kind
really
of
bad sometimes if you don't.
yeah, right. Right. Well, and that's perfect that the way you said that too, because I feel like that fits in with public history so well, right? Is because you're able to take stories that you wouldn't think would kind of come together, and you kind of have a theme running throughout all of it. So I guess my big question, or the big question here as we wrap up, is how do you see documentary filmmaking fitting into public history? Like, why are these films important for Blair County, for the citizens of the county, for society as itself, understanding of the collective history of this local place?
I think that nowadays visual learning is really the way to go. I think, especially with younger people, they love engaging with the visual history. It's not a book. Might not necessarily be a photo or podcast or whatever. It's something that they can look at and visually enjoy. And I think Jared would probably agree with me. I know that he is the PowerPoint wizard when it comes to his classroom presentations, because you need to keep their attention. And by keeping their attention, that is how you engage with them. That is how you educate them. And so I think filmmaking and documentaries in general are a great way of doing just that.
Well, and I think that was something that I really was really great for me as I was watching the film, is the post World War II material that you had was very good. And I think sometimes a lot of documentaries, they kind of, I don't think people realize that is pretty far back there now, right? I mean, we're
Yeah.
80 years away from next year's the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. So things that are happening in the 50s and 60s are now, what, 70 and 60 years, which takes 60 years from World War II and you get in the 1880s, right? So there's a lot
Yeah.
of gap of time that has occurred since the end of the war. And I thought you did a really good job of showing how Blair County, much like a lot of other places in the region, have kind of hit a wall after the war and are now looking to kind of reinvent themselves with things that are new. So I thought that was a great way to kind of incorporate some of that more visual stuff, is using stuff recently. I thought the most striking thing for me was the way you used the bulldozers tearing away these buildings. I mean, that's a very visceral kind of sight as I was sitting there, and as you're kind of talking about the so what of the documentary, the end of the documentary, about what should people take away, what is the action from it. That was really well done. I thought that using more things that are recent as opposed to saying a photograph from pre-World War II, or at least a photograph of the building up. Um, I thought that was a really good job. So I commend you on that, because I was struck at the end of it, like, oh my gosh, yeah, you're right. Like now when I see a bulldozer in the middle of a downtown, I'm going to think back of like, well, what are we knocking down here that we maybe shouldn't?
Yeah. Yeah, that was very important for me to cover. I could have easily ended with, the end of World War II, a very triumphant victory and everything. But the really, in Blair County and Altoona specifically, that was really kind of the beginning of the end, so to speak. The PRR uh, slowly went downhill during into the 50s. Urban revitalization took over, and that's really when you see just a lot of buildings being torn down and not preserved for posterity. So it was definitely a painful past, um, and it's certainly one that we should not be proud of.
Thinking on the kind of locals front and local residents, and this is lived experience that you're sharing now, much more recent, lived memory. I'm curious, you've mentioned that you've been doing screenings of the film. I'm curious about audience reaction. What were some of the takeaways that some of the viewers of the film have shared with you that maybe surprised you, or got you thinking about the film and its impact?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it premiered back in April, and I had my mind blown. The expectations. We sold out at the premiere, and we actually had to open the night before for a technical screening. The theater wasn't available for the night after, so but even that second night filled up quite well. It didn't quite sell out, but we had a pretty much sold out crowds. And that, to me, that was shocking. I was very excited to see that many people cared enough to come and to learn and to support the historical society. But even during the screenings, the way I kind of laid it out is I was like, okay, I don't think we quite reached everyone in the county. Some people couldn't make it to the premiere for some reason or another, and so what I decided to do was have a small screening in essentially each of the small communities, whether it be at a library or some sort of community building, um, and even those did quite well. We typically had anywhere between, I'd guess, 30 or to 60 people for each one, which I thought was kind of the aim. So I was very thrilled that people responded to it well, and a lot of nostalgia. Anytime that you see a place where you used to work or a place where your father used to work, it kind of hits you in the feels. And I think as the movie progresses too, then and that becomes even more evident, because they realize, okay, what am I doing, and can I do more? And that was kind of the whole point of the movie, is that I want people to think, and I want people to work at being better.
Well, I want to take it, we keep kind of narrowing in a little bit more and a little bit more. So we've talked about Blair County, we talked about the film. Now I want to talk about you, Mark.
Ooh.
So I'm really curious, just looking at your background and where you've worked and the variety of different places in public history that you've worked in. I'm really curious about, this is something that we try to do on the podcast, is really dive into the various kinds of public historians that are out there, and how they got into their jobs. I'm really curious, like, what was your inspiration to go into filmmaking and to do this kind of combining history and the filmmaking, whether it's in documentaries or short films. Talk a little bit about your background and your inspirations for filmmaking.
I think it all is kind of rooted in watching history movies as a child. I have fond memories of watching Gettysburg when I was little, and that's just a fantastic movie. Acting is great, but like, just the amount of logistics and practical effects and all of these things, it's like it's very interesting to me. I want to know how they did this. I want to know what it takes to pull off something like that. And so I definitely give full credit to just watching history movies as a kid and a young adult. And I even think of my eighth grade teacher, who was a big history buff, and she always stayed after school with me to talk history while I was waiting for my parents to pick me up. And I think it was actually maybe around that time that I fell in love with movie making, because she had us do some sort of video essay type thing, and I got into editing around that time period. So that's kind of where it all came from. I Ever since then, I have morphed the two passions of history and film together whenever I can.
That's you brought up editing, so I have to ask, do you have a favorite part of the filmmaking process that you most enjoy?
Definitely not editing.
Ah!
I think I like going out and actually getting the shots. Um, and for this film, it was quite an endeavor. I traveled more than 1,000 miles. Um,
That's crazy.
I actually have a making of presentation that I should send you guys. Like I said, I have a bunch of fun numbers about like how many hours I edited, how many hours I or how many miles I drove, and how many photos I scanned, and all the fun stats. But I think going out and getting the shot is the thing that I probably enjoy the most.
Oh, you've spoken of the part that always freaks me out the most, and the limited amounts of shooting. Had some filmmaking classes in school, and I've gotten to practice a little bit of that in some past jobs at museums as well. I was always fond of the editing process, especially if somebody else was responsible for collecting all the footage and the audio, because that's the thing that I inevitably messed up. I know we're making a podcast here where we're responsible for it, so hopefully the audio will sound okay. It makes me panic. So the editing part where it's like, okay, we have all the resources, and even if we don't have all the resources, we have to make this work. So then it's kind of like that stitching together piece I've always found is like my like form of zen and like artwork in this space.
Or
But it's so funny. I talk to other filmmakers all the time, and it's like it's always interesting to me to see where's people's interests and where their skill sets lie.
Well, I will say this: I did thoroughly enjoy adding sound effects, um, and I feel like even in some places I got carried away, maybe a little too much. But sound design was very fun. I enjoyed recoloring. I mean, there's shots in the movie that I show this pretty sunset and was actually just like a gray, dreary day, and I just added so much orange and yellow and make it pretty. Yeah, so stuff like that is always fun to do, and you end up being like just very proud of something like very simple. So
Yeah,
It
it
sounds
is.
like I was gonna say we need to put you two together so you guys can team up now. Mark, just send Jake all of your stuff. He'll edit everything for you. It's his moment of zen. It's gonna be great.
yeah, there we go, dream team.
Yep. It's I will say, I think my takeaway, I mean, I have many takeaways from this film. I think you did an amazing job of telling a local history story, bringing it to the big scale, showing how Blair County fits into American history and really world history, but then bringing it back down to the personal. I think from a storytelling aspect, you do an amazing job. But I will say the visuals in this are amazing. It looks visually stunning. So bravo to you on going out and getting that incredible B-roll, and it just you've done Blair County proud by making it look for the dynamic, beautiful place that many of those landscapes are, especially.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
So going into our conclusion here, I just want to kind of ask you where so listeners have heard this interview and then now they're curious about the film. Where can listeners find the film now or in the future?
If you're old school and into physical media, you can buy DVDs directly off of the Blair County Historical Society. Their website is www.blairhistory.org. You can also find it on PBS Passport. And then also, coming soon, it will also be on the platform History Fix, which I don't know if you guys have heard of History Fix, but it seems like it's a very good platform for history films and documentaries.
That's awesome. And be sure to definitely go out and see it if you can. We're going to shift now to our postscript. This is the section of the show where we usually share something from the last week that's left an impression on us. We want to share, it could be a book, an article, a movie, or an experience. Does not have to be history related. Jake and Jake, I don't even know where to start with some of the postscripts that we've had. But from the last week, anything you kind of want to remember, I'll start. That way we're not putting all the pressure on you, Mark. I am currently listening to an audiobook called the When the Sea Came Alive. It is a new oral history of D-Day. And I would highly, this is the first book I've ever recommended getting the audiobook over the actual book. And the reason why I say that is it is, and the title of the audiobook says it is by, I think, written by what, Jared Goff. No, Groff. Goff's the quarterback for the Detroit Lions. Um, I can't remember the exact name, but anyway, it's him and cast, and they have over. I mean, I've only been 5 or 6 hours through the book, and I've heard 70 different voices. So it's either somebody doing all the different voices, but each individual passage is a different voice, which makes it great because it really shows you the breadth of everybody involved in D-Day. It's not one single person reading it over and over again. And what it does a really good job at is it will incorporate those big kind of speeches that you know into the audiobook. So when Franklin Delano Roosevelt talks about D-Day, the day that will live in infamy, you are hearing him say it. When Churchill's giving some of his speeches about fighting on the, or not that one, but he was one of the ones on the BBC, you are listening to that. You don't get that with the book. So I thought that was a really great way for a medium as an audiobook to kind of jump ahead of the actual printed off version that I've never experienced on a book. Usually every audiobook that I get, I'm like, man, it'd be really nice to actually be able to sit down and read this. This is the first one that I'm glad I'm listening to it. Which I don't know what that says about the medium and public history, but it's fascinating. It's a really great way to do, I think, a book, specifically this one, which is that oral history. So you're going to have hundreds and hundreds of different voices, and being able to actually have hundreds and hundreds of different voices really makes a big difference. So that's my postscript for the week.
I will jump in here, Justin, to say I think this is our second time, maybe third time, referencing a book by it's Garrett Graff.
Garrett
Is
Graff. Why did
the
this? I'm watching too much football today.
yeah,
Golly.
yeah. Um, and this is his second venture into oral history. He did one called Only Plane in the Sky, which was about 9/11. And the audiobook was a similar format. It was all acted. But I will say one of my favorite authors of nonfiction. He's incredible. So anything you can pick up by Garrett Graff, I would recommend. He's done a book about Watergate. He's done probably my favorite book of all time, which is called Raven Rock. It's a history. I'm trying to remember the subtitle. It's a crazy subtitle name. Oh, it's the U.S. government's plan to survive nuclear war while the rest of us die. And it's a Cold War history of basically how the U.S. government planned to do continuity of government, or COG, in the event of a nuclear war with the Soviets. So yeah, anything you can get by Garrett Graff, highly recommend. It's pretty good stuff. So Mark, now that you've heard Justin's, do you have any postscripts for our listeners this week?
Well, this past week, this film actually was selected for a film festival somewhat recently, and did not win, unfortunately. But I was kind of down about that, of course, as one is. But I kind of pulled myself together and said, "You have to keep going. That's all you can do. Is that, yeah, you can't give up on yourself or a project that you're working on." And so I encourage everyone to hang tough. And I immediately got on a website and submitted to a couple more film festivals instead. So I
Dick
I
Winters
think
would be proud,
I think
Mark.
that's something to live by.
Yeah, Dick Winters would be proud.
I'm
That
glad you got
hangs
that
up.
reference.
Yeah. Jake, how about you? What's your postscript for the week?
All right, so it's a book mini-series duo. So just debuting this week was a new series on Hulu produced by FX called Say Nothing, which is based on a book by Patrick Radden Keefe from a few years back. It's a story of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, specifically really telling the story of like four people that go through the Troubles starting in the late 1960s up to the present day. And it focuses on really story of the murder of a widowed mother of 10 named Jean McConville, who is disappeared during the Troubles, during the Civil War, low-key Civil War in Northern Ireland in the 1970s. And it turns into sort of a murder mystery. It tells the story of the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, and the efforts to stop them in some cases on the British side, and kind of some of the lingering traumas and what's left behind in the decades after that war came to an end in the 1990s, with a peace treaty. It is The book is wonderful. I think some of the best nonfiction storytelling that is out there. Patrick Radden Keefe is an amazing author. But the mini series, going into it, I went into it with a bit of skepticism because I love the book so much. You know how that sometimes can go. And But they did just a great job of telling the story and of just making a really, really compelling piece of television that gets to the heart of some issues that we even have in our own society today. It is a film exclusively about Ireland and about the situation in Northern Ireland between Protestants and Catholics and the IRA and the British government, but it lingers on themes like trauma, violence, political violence, the ramifications of political violence, and just how far down into inhumanity some of these conflicts, especially civil wars, can get, and the consequences of that on those who are, in some cases, just caught in the middle of it. And I would highly, highly recommend, if you don't have Hulu, pick it up for a couple of days, and binge watch this. It is all available all at once, all 9 episodes. And if you like the series and you haven't read the book yet, go back and read the book, because it is. I'm listening to the audiobook now, having just about finished the series. It's really, really compelling. And Yeah, I think that's worthy of a postscript for this episode. All right, so that is going to bring our episode almost to an end. Before we finish out completely, I did just want to say, Mark, thank you so much for coming on today, and really excited to see what future projects are in the works for you, and really, really enjoyed our conversation today.
Thank you very much, guys. I had a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you all so much for listening today. We hope you enjoyed today's episode with filmmaker Mark Frederick. If you're liking the show, please be sure to rate and review the podcast and give us a thumbs up on YouTube. We're going to try to get better at getting episodes out to you on a more regular basis, so keep an eye and ear out for more exciting episodes coming down the pipe. We'll talk to you again soon.